What's up, Shred Sexies? We're going to be getting into this killer sort of descending arpeggio idea that I've been messing around with for a couple of weeks, but I couldn't quite wrap my mind around the theory, and so I want to teach you that today, of course. It's based off this Rick Graham idea, so the video's in the description below if you want to take what we're doing right now to the, the uber ultra level. There it is. That's how you do it. Good luck. But for us mere mortals, if you will, the point of this video essentially is to understand the underlying music principles, to sort of have the ability to deconstruct this really incredible line and sort of have an idea about, how it's made up, with what scales, what key they're talking about, and the various arpeggio shapes and whatnot, where those come from, the scale degrees, if you will, and how they're being attached together using musical ideas. So it's going to be a pretty cool lesson. Let's get into it. All right, step one here has to be essentially regress this information into something that's actually usable. So I know where this arpeggio happens naturally in the diatonic scale, right? Knowing a piece of information without knowing its, sort of like relative location in the big picture is useless information, which means it just takes up space on the hard drive, but you never actually end up using it. And when you do try to use it, it's usually in a misunderstood sort of context, and it just, it's for the birds. So we want to avoid that. We want to basically integrate this information that we're going to invest time figuring out, decoding, if you will, from Rick, and then be able to, essentially overlay it with the information we already know. And that step there is incredibly important. So he did the example in G major. I'm going to do it in C major. It means we're going to start here at the 3rd fret on the A string, right? So he starts off with this C major 9. So I need to decode that. So essentially the standard sound is. And he explains everything in his video there, so I'm not going to go through it because it'll just take longer. But once you get that far, you got to basically start breaking down the interval structure. That's got to be number one. You move from the root here, up a major 3rd, then a minor 3rd, right? Then another major 3rd, then a minor 2nd, right? Then a major 3rd, a minor 3rd, a major 3rd, and then, another minor 2nd kind of situation. I think you can see this stuff starting to take shape, right? Very important that you can do stuff like that. At first, you're like, I don't see the relevance. Why should I waste my time with that? 10 years from now, you'll be like, man, am I ever glad that I did that? Take it from me. We could get into a long-winded theory thing, but I won't. Believe you me when I tell you this is one of the secret weapons of the most killer musicians on the face of the earth. They have this skill, this chop, and you don't. Acquire it now by basically doing that simple thing of breaking down the intervals, or now being like, okay, I've got this. That's very similar to all mysteries are revealed, right? So you're like, oh, look, it's a 2nd inversion major triad. In this case, I'd be starting at the 3rd fret of the low E string, G, right? Because it starts on the 5 of the C major chord, right? Because there's C, there's E, and then G. So I'm putting it on the bottom. And then all I did was ditch the low E string. And then I started on the A string, and I'm like, okay, this one here. You're like, if I moved up here to the 8th fret, it's the exact same thing. So when I'm doing it on the low E string, it's. And when I started on the A string now, it's. Yikes, right? So I haven't done that one in a while. Looks like I need to work on that a little bit more, but you get the idea, right? It's the same thing. It just looks slightly different, but it's the exact same sequence of notes, right? And of course, then now you can be like, okay, there's the 1st degree, 3rd, 5th, 7th, skipping over the 1 to the 9 now, and of course, just rounding it off. right? And you're off to the races essentially, right? And of course, from there, you're like, okay, well, if I've got that arpeggio, I'm already seeing this triad here. That gives me the A-type position from Caged, or maybe I've got the G here. Right? And there you've got now that system sort of locked in. You'd be like, well, if that's true, now all of a sudden that's the Mixolydian position there. Right? Because I still have this sequence of notes. It could be Aeolian, right? I may be playing those notes one at a time, but I'm playing every single one of these notes. Right? That entire sort of spine there. I'm playing, I can, at any point in time, play them because it's part of the scale. And since I have that, if I put just 3 of them together, I get this triad. And when I do that, then I automatically know it's going to be this one. Then I'm like, oh, look, I can move backwards to the C-type because I know the C-type and the A-type go together. And A and G go together. And G and E go together. And E and D go together. And once you start doing things like that, all of a sudden, now when you're playing, you're like, I'm in the Mixolydian position. I'm jamming out in C major and A minor. Oh, C major 9, you said? You see what I'm saying? Now all of a sudden this has a home and you can start factoring it in there and you're just like, man, that's awesome. Or maybe do a more sort of nuanced sequenced idea where you start off with like a dominant 7 and then jump into the major 9. You see what I mean? All of a sudden you've opened up way more doors and you have this real world tool that you can actually use. And you would have never have gotten there if you didn't actually do the interval structure and figure out where it sits with the Cage system. And then use that to relate it back to 3 notes per string or the pentatonic system. And then once you get all of that together and you've put a pin on the map, if you will, well, now it's whenever you want to use it, you can. Not just, oh, it's only when I do this lick. Now all of a sudden you can do the lick at Mixolydian. And you'll be like, oh, okay. That makes it a lot more useful. Now it's not just something I can do, when I'm just practicing with no music. I can just take a small chunk of that actual crazy Rick Graham lick, just the first part with the first part of the arpeggio, or any of them, of course, and layer it over a position of the diatonic scale using the very technique I just showed you. And of course, boom, insta licks. Okay, so and you've doubled up. If you're playing solo, you have the descending arpeggio run, which is going to sound amazing. If you're improvising and playing with the band, well, now you have this new flavor that starts in the Mixolydian position to get a major 9. Done. Okay, let's move on to the next section where we talk about the voice leading. All right, section 2 here basically concentrates on the idea of voice leading. What musical function is Rick trying to accomplish here? So what he's doing is recycling this root note. In this case, it's G, but in our case, it'll be C. But he's basically manipulating the arpeggio related to this root note from a major 9 to a major 7 to a minor 7 flat 5 to a fully diminished version. And you get this cool sort of like, sequence of arpeggios, if you will, that sound great. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack, but basically the most important stuff is that you can see the standard diminishment, if you will, of these chords from one to the next. So it goes from the major. When you corrupt that one, you get the minor. And you could also say dominant 7, but we're just going to leave that off for right now. From the minor, it goes to the minor 7 flat 5. From the minor 7 flat 5, it goes to the fully diminished. That is incredibly important information because it explains musical gravity in a nice, neat little package that you can contemplate for decades. And trust me, if you get right down to it, you will. So let's put the theoretical stuff into practice. Again, I know most of these shapes because I understand the positions, so I'm going to talk about them. Essentially, we're starting off in Mixolydian here with this major 9 flavor. Now this third voice leading, he's going to diminish it, move it down a half step, and a couple of the other notes, of course, too. And in doing so, you get this effect musically. Okay, that's the important thing. If you do not diminish the right notes in the right sequence, it doesn't sound good, and you've made a mistake. So the whatever, the hypothetical answer at the other side of the equal signs, it's not what it's supposed to be, right? So that's how you know if it starts sounding really weird and it's not done on purpose, you're in the weeds. So that's why you have to basically train yourself to anticipate what the next sound's going to be, right? And understand this functionality, this voice leading, the idea that I start off with this one particular sound and I want to start manipulating it. I want to chip off a little bit here and a little bit there so that I get moving from this one particular shape to a new shape, if you will. You know what I mean? As far as a visual representation is concerned. So again, ascending with the major 9, I should say, and then into the minor 7, into diminished again from Locrian. Now, that one's a little weird, and of course into essentially symmetrical. Now the thing is you can actually literally hear those notes moving from the previous arpeggio to the next one, literally moving down. You can hear them moving down. And then he just starts adding in a whole bunch of extra notes. But I don't want to go crazy on this section because we could spend a year talking about it and even not even then basically scratch the surface. Instead, just start off with this idea. You're like, I have this one state, this really solid state, you know, where you're just like, there's no tension there. It's not like you're given diminished or dominant 7 or anything else. It's just solid. It's rock solid from a music perspective, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, I want to manipulate that. Now, of course, using the 9 and stuff like that is just going to help, if you will, with the voice leading. So if you were to do it with a triad and then try to do the voice leading, and you're like, well, that doesn't work at all. It sounds terrible. Those two transitions don't work at all. That's when you know you have to do something to the first one by upping its complexity either to a major 7, major 9, major 11, major 13, some sort of variant there, a suspended chord. There's a whole bunch. You might have to use a backdoor dominant, blah, blah, blah. That's where the music theory starts coming into real play. But ultimately, no matter what, you have to understand this basic sort of principle of notes sort of gradually decreasing into, you know, decaying, if you will, into another chord. I move from one chord and it's pristine. This is a perfectly ripe banana, right? You're in a few spots now. Well, it's mostly brown now, right? And last but not least, of course, you've got, you know, it's just, it's banana bread stuff. So there it is. Okay. You got to understand these concepts more so than just be able to play the arpeggios. And then, of course, put a face to the name. That first one came from the Mixolydian position. The next one came from the Phrygian position, just all starting on the A string, of course. The next one came from Locrian. Okay, if I look at this one here, if I move over here to the 6th string and I play the same shape, I already know that that's going to be from the Locrian position to do minor 7 flat 5. And of course, fully diminished, as I've mentioned many times, is just a symmetrical shape, which means you'll always have the same sequence and pattern of notes. Now listen, obviously practicing it from the perspective of 6 strings and 5 strings, very beneficial. So that's something you can start to work in there. But voice leading, another one of these big ones. You don't have to be the theory master. You got to use your ears. But if you don't understand this principle, you're going to be hurting later on with respect to music, because it just gets incredibly formulaic and boring. And you're just like, I don't want to play. But once you start doing stuff like this, well, it gets a lot more interesting. And of course, you've probably heard hundreds of songs, if not thousands, that use this basic principle of a pedal tone, basically, you know, either from a classical perspective or from a rock or metal perspective, where it starts diminishing like that. And it's just, it's a tried and true sort of songwriting and soloing tool. Mint. Okay, let's talk about turning it into a 3-in-1 situation. All right, another important piece of information that Rick imparts in his video is essentially with respect to the 3-in-1 aspect there. So now listen, initially when he does it, he's just playing 2 notes and then he does 3 notes. I'm more of a 3 and then 1 and then 3-in-1 and then 3-in-1 kind of situation, but you do whatever it is that you want to do. So in this example, just for the sake of changing it up, we're going to do 3-in-1 straight up, right? So the first one here, obviously, if we take this C major 9 arpeggio, nice. Right, the first one's obvious, and again, these all come from 3 notes per string, right? There's G major. Right, so if I moved it up to the next one here, obviously, that would be essentially now G mixolydian, right? If you don't understand what I just did there, sit down and think about that one for a little bit, because you'll be like, huh? I took the major scale, 3 notes per string here, applied it to G. And then what I did was just take the same idea and now be like, I want to start on the A string. And when I did that, I realized instantly that I had to shift up in the position, which makes it basically G mixolydian. So I could tack on those ones on the bottom, which also lets me keep going, right? With no fear of losing track of where I am. Because you're like, oh, it's G mixolydian. That puts me at A aeolian, of course, B locrian, then of course C major, and so on and so forth. And you'll be so basically comfortable with these 3 notes per string and the classical method shapes that you'll just be able to whip around the fretboard whenever you want to. Right, so that's where these notes come from, for the 3-in-1 situation, right? So essentially when I'm doing the major 9, I'm just going to fill in this one. Yeah, of course, right? Those all come from the locrian right there. Major, major again. You could even add in another one there, you know, you could sort of do down, down, up, down, down, up. That's 3 downs in a row. I should do it, right? Very interesting and cool sound. Obviously, you're going to get 2 different 3-in-1s there if you did it the other way, where you're doing it on the low string. Very cool shape. I like to borrow those ones where I get to the 3 notes on the high E string, just because it sounds a little different. But then you're like, oh, if I just start with 1 note, I'm going to get the 3-in-1 basically happening on the A string. Again, great ways to take the same information and recycle it to get something a lot more meaningful so that you can apply it. And then you'd be like, oh, I can do it now again on the D string. So now you're going to have 1 note on the A string, and you'd be able to cascade up and down using this technique, which can be very easily assimilated using economy picking and sweeping. Okay, that's why I'm teaching it to you. This allows you to go insanely fast, faster than anything you can actually accomplish with alternate picking. There's just no competition. Okay, watch guys like Alex Hutchinson and Frank Gambale, of course, and there's a whole bunch of other ones in there. And the chops come from the idea that they're doing the 3-in-1 and the sweeping idea and the economy picking, because that is the ultimate sort of fast track to speed. Done, right? But of course, alternate picking is very important too. And if you want to hit the pinnacle there, it's Racer X and Malmsteen and all that good stuff, right? So you're going to start off with the first 3 notes. 3 more, 1, 3 more. And again, I'm doing down, up, down, 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 up, down, right? And then down, down, up, down. That lets me start with the upstroke so I can come back down. So I'm always doing the consecutive sort of upstrokes across 3 strings and stuff like that. It's very, very, very useful and very important exercise to be practicing on a regular basis. That right there is a game changer with respect to your playing. And then, of course, you're just going to keep going, right? So when I diminish it down to the minor, I'm going to get from essentially this Phrygian position, right? So now you got nice, right then? Now you can be like, or actually prefer this configuration. Don't ask me. To me, it's just got a slightly more kind of interesting melodic sound there, right? When you're doing it faster. It's got like a cool sort of melodic minor kind of feel to it, right? But either or, it doesn't matter, right? Of course, moving into the next one, diminished, right? So you already know that that's going to be the first 3 notes from Locrian, right? Right then. Right, so on and so forth. I don't want to give them all away because I want you to work on some of them for yourself. You know, whichever one. Maybe you're going to do symmetrical kind of shape. Sit there and try to hear the sequence of notes so it makes sense. You're like, that sounds right to me. There is no right or wrong answer. That sounds right to me. That's how I like it. That's what sounds cool to me. And play that. Okay? And that's just it. You might be like, well, you know, yeah, I suppose you could do that as a Phrygian, but it could also be part of the Aeolian position. Right? Which would give you, of course, a different sequence here, right? Right, so that's where those 2 variants come from. When you start to see the 2 different scales superimposed over top of each other, you're like, I have both options. And so always sort of like locking your mindset into just doing one or the other is never good. So that right there is how to evolve a simple arpeggio shape, because you should recognize you're like, there's 2 notes, then 1, then 2 notes, then 1, then 2 notes. Well, just by adding 1 extra note there, I get the down, up, down, 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 up, down, down, down. Then I can go up, down, up, down, up. Oops, I didn't quite make that one. I should have went diminished. I didn't. Fail. There it is. Okay. You just have to sort of like see this stuff as in small sort of like meaningful sized chunks. Pick one of the things that we talked about today, or 2. Well, I want to work on voice leading. Start with an arpeggio. Do like a first inversion major. Ditch the low E string. So now you go with. And start learning how to manipulate that so that you can get all the other ones. Now, notice I started with a minor there. So you're going to have to come up with a different sequence. It won't be the obvious one that we just did. Okay, so that's sort of like the homework idea. But notice once you do the decoding part, you can move to the Phrygian position or somewhere else and accomplish the same ideas by just applying the same methodology. I think I swallowed a bug or something. Excuse me. Okay, so number 1, regress information that's complex down to simpler terms, and then try to put it together where it fits in the big picture. In this case, with the major 9, it works with the Mixolydian position. When I'm talking about the next one, the minor 7 here, well, that's basically in the Phrygian position. Okay, and so basically understanding that information is incredibly important, because you can be like, oh, look, I can play a C-type chord right here. You know what I mean? If you're like, oh, I'm doing this particular shape, then I have this minor arpeggio, but if I move up to this one, I have the major chord. in its root inversion. And then you're like, oh, well, if that's the C type, then I know I have the A type, and then the G type, and then the E type. And of course, you can see how useful that is. When you're like, oh, look, there's the E type. Well, you can be like, well, when I'm doing the E type, that's basically like when I'm playing in the first inversion. You're like, there's the major scale or the major pentatonic. Right? So that's why it's really important to sort of concentrate on that. Then you've got the voice leading stuff. Obviously, that's a little bit more advanced. And last but not least is just being like recognizing some simple truths. You're like 2 notes, 1, 2, 1, 2. You're like, what else can I do with that? And you're like, okay, why not fill it in? Done. Instantly, you're like 3 in 1 now. And of course, when you see Rick do it, you're like, damn. Right? And of course, you can start combining that with other things. I just did actually another one where they use this arpeggio shape, if you will, to do a sequence. So they ascend here, then they ascend again, and then again in groups of like 4 like that. And of course, they just come back down. So just completely inadvertently, I got 2 licks that basically use the major 9 arpeggio shape. One in this case, incidentally, was being played up at the 15th. Rick's is at the 10th. And then I just combined them both to be played at the 3rd. Major 9, major 9. Put them together. This one is a sequence. This one is a 3 in 1 lick or an arpeggio. Done. I hope this video helped. And I appreciate, of course, every single one of you. You're all awesome. Keep practicing. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one.